All right, well, thank you all for coming out this afternoon for this talk. My name is Matt Zwolinski. I'm a professor of philosophy here at the University of San Diego, and I also am the director of the Center for Ethics, Economics, and Public Policy, which is one of the organizations sponsoring this event. I also want to thank the Harp Center for Catholic Thought and Culture as our co-sponsor for this talk. At the center that I run, the Ethics, Economics, and Public Policy Center, we spend a lot of time talking about, thinking about issues of public policy. So we've had a number of lectures and debates on issues like the minimum wage. We've had events on immigration policy, on gun control laws. But one of the things that has become, I think, increasingly apparent to me with age and maybe with experience is that the public policies of a country are only as strong or as weak as the people who are in charge of designing, interpreting, implementing, and abiding by those policies. Nations, someone once said, nations are not made of oak and wood, but of men, and such as the men of a country are, so will a country itself be. And I think far and away the most important factor in shaping the men and women of a country are families. And it has become increasingly clear in recent years that the family in America is undergoing something of a crisis. Fewer people are getting married, they're getting married later. Fewer married couples are having children. And those married couples that do have children are finding it increasingly difficult to raise those children in the way that they want to raise them. It seems like the obstacles to having a family are piling up and for a lot of people becoming simply insurmountable, such that it's just not worth all the hassle anymore of trying to raise children. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our country? What does that mean for us as individuals? For those of you who might or might not be wanting to start families of your own after you graduate college, that is the topic of our discussion tonight, and I am really, really grateful and humbled to have Timothy Carney here to lead us in that discussion. Tim is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's a senior columnist at the Washington Examiner and the author of 4 books. His 2019 book, Alienated America, really a terrific and in many ways, I think, prescient book, was a Washington Post bestseller, named one of the best books of the year by the Wall Street Journal. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Atlantic, National Review, you name it. And he's here tonight to speak about his most recent book, Family Unfriendly, How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. Tim is a man who speaks with some experience and authority on this issue. As the father of 6 children himself, he knows what he speaks. I have 4 kids, and as an academic, I don't often meet people with more than 4 kids, so I'm a little, it used to be much more common, but nowadays it's such an anomaly to meet somebody with a large family like that. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. It's a terrific book. I really encourage you all to check the book out yourself if you are intrigued by what you hear in our discussion tonight. We're going to get just a taste of it, but there's a lot in this book that I'm sure we won't have time to go into here. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Tim Carney for tonight's lecture.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks to our sponsors. Thank you, everyone who's coming. I'm not from San Diego, so I'm really not used to nice weather in February, and so that you guys are giving up an hour or so of that tonight, it makes me extra grateful. And as Matt said, I have 6 children at home, and my wife was texting me about how she's doing double duty, including my normal task of playing cards with our 8-year-old daughter. So please offer your prayers for my wife, Katie, who needs them every time I abandon my family to talk about the importance of family. I want to start with my first day as a dad. And yes, that is me. That's not my brother who has hair. That's me, just long ago. And there's lots of moments from that day that I absolutely remember, absolutely, with every detail. And because there's young people here who have never witnessed childbirth, I won't provide the details of that. But I will tell you about a moment when I woke up in the middle of the night and my wife was asleep. The baby had been rolled out to a sort of makeshift nursery in the hallway of Sibley Memorial Hospital in D.C. I couldn't sleep because while my wife got a bed, I got this really uncomfortable armchair. Nobody talks about how hard childbirth is on the men, but it really was rough for me there, sitting in that armchair. And just the feeling I describe, I use the phrase, the burden of love. It was this weight. I was a 27-year-old dude, and all of a sudden, there was this weight I was taking on my shoulders that was unlike anything before. But it wasn't a weight, it was also a lightness. And I'm not enough of a poet to describe it well, but I'll say I walked out into the makeshift nursery in the hallway, and I remember just one of those moments, staring down at this perfect face and just thinking, what is she gonna look like when she grows up? Will she be a big sister to a lot of siblings? Can I make her be a Mets fan? And as all of these thoughts are going through my mind, the nurse tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Sir, your baby is 3 bassinets over. You're just staring at somebody else's child right now." The point being, we were in this makeshift nursery because in 2006, there was a ton of babies being born. We were the overflow wing of the hospital. All the famous people had babies. That's Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes had Surrey Cruise as their baby. There were more babies born in 2006 than in any year since the baby boom. And then it kept going. The next year, it went up even higher and surpassed even the baby boom. Everybody got on the bandwagon, trying to be like Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, and me. And we had the beginning of what people thought would be a 21st century baby boom. And sure enough, Britney Spears, she had a baby in 2006 as well. She's a millennial. A lot more millennials than Gen X because they are the children of the baby boomers. In 2006, 2007, they were just coming into their 20s, into their prime childbearing years. And so we were going to get that 21st century baby boom. We, of course, did not. The number of babies has fallen every year since 2007. And at first, it was blamed on the Great Recession. Then the Great Recession ended, and the number of babies kept falling. And now we're down below 3.6 million babies a year from 4.3 million. So, the best measure of birth rate is called the total fertility rate. It's a modeled number. It calculates how many babies each woman is having over the course of her whole life. And so that red line is at 2.1. That's what demographers say. That's a replacement level. At that level, your population will be steady without immigration or net migration out. We peaked above that in those 2 years, 2006 and 2007. Now we've fallen way below. This chart isn't even up to date. It's down to 1.62 now. So it's just unquestionable that the whole baby-making thing is something that we're turning away from a little bit. So one result of this, we actually have fewer children, that is people under the age of 18, in America today than we did a decade ago. Not just as a percentage of the population, but there's actually fewer of them. My daughter's high school graduating class this spring will be basically the peak, this year and next year, and then after that, every year, American high schools will have fewer and fewer graduates for the foreseeable future. And trust me, administrators at every college in America are very well aware of this fact. So this is the U.S. population. One diagram that demographics people often use is typically called the age pyramid. Those top sections are people who are 100 and over, 99 and over. The right side is women, the left side is men. And it's called an age pyramid because usually it's a lot fatter at the bottom because populations tend to grow. But ours is, I don't know, an age onion it's a lot skinnier at the bottom than it is in those middle sections. And you can see the baby boom pretty visibly on that. So we definitely have a baby bust. But talking about this, why didn't we talk about this for years? Well, because it seems weird. The first time I started posting on Twitter about birth rates, I had multiple people tell me it was kind of gross that I was tweeting about women's bodies or about women's decisions. And this is a friend of mine. She's a liberal feminist. A Twitter friend of mine, I should say. And when I made one of these posts a couple years ago, she said, honest question, considering that overpopulation is quite literally killing the planet, why does it matter to you that the birth rate is down? Why do you insist on more births? How is it helpful to anyone? Similar sentiment from another journalist. She called up a study by an economist named Melissa Carney. Her name sounds like mine, it's spelled different. And this economic study looked at how much does affordability affect births? Specifically, how much does the change in affordability affect the change in births on a local level? And she found that the increase in child care costs only had a slight impact on it. Increase in rental costs didn't really have an impact. Increase in student loan debt didn't really tend to drive down birth rate. And so this woman, Lydia DePilla, said, the conclusion, surprise, surprise, is that younger women might just want more out of life than children. So again, why should we care about a falling birth rate? So I give 4 reasons. 1, the economic reason. There's something called the dependency ratio. How many retired people are there to how many workers? As that gets thrown off in an aging population, people are worse off. Number 2, not necessarily columnist Lydia DePillis, but on average, American women still want babies. Number 3, and this is where most of my book goes, and when I talk about culture, the baby bust reflects something unwell about our culture. And finally, I will argue that babies are in fact good. So let's talk about the dependency ratio, that age onion. We have more Americans in their 60s than we have under age 10. What does that mean 15, 20 years from now? It means we'll have more and more retirees and fewer workers. And so one of the things that this means, obviously Social Security, Medicare, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. They're already paying out more than they're taking in from Social Security. But I kind of see that as the reflection off of the Plato's cave. That's a reflection on the wall. The problem in itself is that we have actually fewer workers. I moved from Maryland to Virginia a couple of years ago, and one day I was working from home, and I thought, I'm going to walk down to the 4 Provinces. That's the Irish pub that we used to go to when we were young. And I'm going to, order some lunch and sit at the bar and get some work done there. And I got up, and there's a sign on the door, and it said, due to a labor shortage, we're not open for lunch anymore. And that bummed me out. That's going to happen more and more. And you may be thinking, my inability to drink while I'm writing at noon might not actually be a public policy crisis. But while I was walking home, I read a story that the 911 emergency dispatchers, their response time was going up because they also had a labor shortage on those things. That's all going to be exacerbated 10, 15 years from now when we have fewer and fewer people who are even of working age. Some of it will be replaced by technology. Maybe ChatGPT will be good at sending the ambulance to the right house. Maybe they won't. I'm not a tech expert. But the dependency ratio is a problem. That's a working age population from the 1970s until today. It was steadily rising. It's flatlined. In other countries that are more advanced in their baby bust, it's falling. Ours will start falling pretty soon. So, as economist Alan Cole put it, neither private savings nor government pension schemes work unless there are enough workers to meet the needs of older Americans. The way we pay for stuff is not really money. Money is a reflection. Again, the way we pay for stuff is productive capacity, is work, people who make stuff or do services. That's my economic argument. I actually don't think that's the most important. I think that's one of the least important, but I always start with it because that's in Washington, D.C., that's sort of the language of policy. So second reason to care about it. The ideal number of kids in a family is actually rising. It was between 3 and 4, and then the birth control pill comes, and then you see that drop off. It's been between 2 and 3. In the last couple years, it's been higher than it had been before COVID, and now the average answer is 2.7. Not that a lot of people are saying they want 2.7 kids, but that is the average, so closer to 3 than to 2. So when we're having 1.6, that's a problem. This is a tricky graph to look at, I know, but that sort of teal line is when people are asked, this is a lowball estimate. So this is just asking basically women who we don't suspect are saying that the ideal number is the number they have. Like if my wife said, I think 5 is the ideal number of kids, and one of my kids might think, what the hell, which one of us is it? That's suboptimal. So this lowball estimate done by this demographer, Lyman Stone, said the lowest honest estimate you could give for American women is that they say 2.3 is the ideal. The orange line is a different line. It's how many do they intend to have. Those two used to track really closely if you look at that graph. And then they forked off back around 2008. So this is the family I would like. This is the family I plan to have. But then what is the family they actually have? It's a lot lower. The page says 1.7. Since I made that slide, it's gone down to 1.6. So there's two deficits there, right? There's what I would love, what I am planning on instead. That drop-off, that's a real thing that happens in life. Like, I just bought a house. I would have loved the wraparound front porch. I dialed down my desires. But this is a bigger deficit. This is a much more important thing because our family, our immediate family, these are the people we love the most. These are the people who, will be written up in our obituaries. These are the people who are going to give your eulogies at your funerals. These are the people you're going to spend decades and decades with. You're going to spend a couple decades living with them and a couple more decades constantly thinking of them and being in touch with them. And on that crucial fact, we have a significant deficit between what people want and what they're aiming for. And then a second deficit from what they're aiming for to what they're get. So to take a quick aside, the natural question is, okay, if people want more kids, why aren't they having them? And I think that's a very good question. To write Family Unfriendly, I went all around the country to various different places and talked to people about family. One of the places I went was Utah, which is always in the top 5 of birth rates. But in Salt Lake City, and I found a neighborhood right by the University of Utah called the Avenues. And it looked like a great place to raise kids, but something about its proximity to this university kind of kept there from being a lot of kids. And I walked around for over an hour, and I didn't find any families. And finally, I run into this couple. Isaac and Nicole were their names. And I stop them, and they're super friendly, and I say, hey, could I talk to you? I'm writing a book about family, about babies. And they interrupt me, and they say, we don't want any. I was like, I wasn't trying to sell you any, but thank you for your answer, and explain to me, like, definitely or maybe. And they said, definitely. And I said, why? Why do you think, like, the birth rate is falling? They said, it was becoming so unaffordable. I said, what specifically is less affordable today than it was a generation ago? And Isaac said, healthcare, well, everything. But then he catches himself, and he says, if I'm being honest, it's that we're selfish. Nicole and I always say someone somewhere is watching Teletubbies and cleaning up vomit, and we're going to be drinking margaritas in Paris. Moments later, I'm not joking, a neighbor walked up, a lady pushing a double stroller. Both of the passengers were Chihuahuas. So I walked away from this encounter with my head like reeling. A, because that was like a scene out of Children of Men. B, why would you go to Paris to drink margaritas? But C, those two explanations that he gave, affordability and selfishness, are the two answers I got the most. And I actually think they're both wrong. I'm not saying they don't contribute, they don't matter, but I don't think either of them really make sense. And I argue that there's a bigger thing. Both of them matter, but neither of them is anywhere close to complete, and some of them can't explain the change. What can, I believe, is culture. So first of all, that gray bar there, that was a Great Recession. We had a lot more babies during the Great Recession than we have in any year since. And then 2019, right before the pandemic, we had the best economy of the lifetime of anybody in this room, and we had the lowest birth rate in the lifetime of anybody in this room. COVID happened, this last year, these last 12 months, inflation has been tamed. We basically have full employment. Stock market doing well over the course of the year, even fewer babies. So over time, richer times do not give us higher birth rates, except in the short term. A recession will, for a couple years, drive it down. The 20s actually had lower birth rates than the Great Depression, though. Over time, birth rates, economic thriving do not correlate. And then again, that study by Melissa Carney, rent, student loan debt, child care costs, these affordability measures did not predict the birth rate. Here I'm going to make a big exception. The cost of buying a home does affect the birth rate, all the studies seem to show. But that's shown up as a huge problem in the US in the last 4 years. This baby bust has been going on for a lot longer than that. And we should talk about the cost of buying a home when we get to the questions. Also comparing generations. The millennials and Gen Z are not poorer than Gen X or than the baby boomers, but they have fewer kids. And obviously it's true across countries that the wealthier countries are the ones with the lower birth rates. Here's a study an economist did. He said, how many weeks of work does it take the median full-time employed male worker to cover the annual cost of raising a kid? The annual cost of raising a kid is calculated by the USDA. It's risen a little higher than inflation. So has the median wage of the median full-time worker. So in fact, it's by this Jeremy Horpedal's calculations, it's in fact more affordable to raise a kid even if you just had one breadwinner and he was a median worker, which means he might have finished college or he might not have. It's actually more affordable by this measure to afford children. I'm not saying that that's conclusive proof, but there's lots of evidence to undercut the idea that our current baby bust is due to a sudden spike in the last 18 years in the costs of raising children. I also don't think it's selfishness. If I had a chart of human selfishness, it would be 0, then Adam and Eve eat the fruit, it shoots to 100, and then it stays flat since then. We are not a more selfish species today than we were in 2007 and 2006. But what do we do about selfishness if it's a constant human condition? We create cultures and societies that try to offset the selfishness, that try to align our personal desires with the common good. That's what culture does. They try to align our short-term interests with our long-term interests. And that's where we're failing. And that's, again, why I think it's a cultural issue. A final note on the culture. I know it's hard to read the bottom of that chart, but these are the countries in the OECD, basically the wealthy countries and what their birth rate is. The worst there is South Korea, the red one. All of them are in a fairly tight range, around 1.5, except for the one outlier. That's Israel. Israel does not have a massive welfare state. It's about average for all those countries. Israel is not richer or poorer or more or less educated. It's about average for all those countries. What it is it's culturally exceptional, and that's where you see the exceptional birth rate. Final footnote, Mexico is right above the birth rate, the replacement level in there at 2.1. It's since fallen below. So Israel is the only wealthy country, I believe, with a birth rate above the replacement level. So back to the reasons to care about the baby bust. It means that we're doing something wrong in our culture. If a lot of people are saying, yeah, kids would be fine, but there's just no way I can pull it off. That means, and it's not that what we're doing wrong is we're not lecturing people to have kids. Some people attribute Israel's success to Jewish grandmothers saying, come on, give me another grandkid. I don't think that works in that way. I do think it works in another way, though, because it is true that Israeli mothers are twice as likely as European mothers to get help from their own parents in raising their child. And it's also true in every study I've seen that if you get help from family in raising your first child, you are much more likely to raise a second child. If you get help from friends and neighbors too. Interestingly, more affordable child care for the first child doesn't really predict a second child, except that it might speed it up. But so there is something about culture. Do we have a culture where fewer moms, empty nesters are willing to help their kids? Do we have a culture where fewer neighbors can be counted on to help their kids, to help their neighbors raise their kids? I think all of that is going on. But I'm going to start with parenting culture. I won't dwell on this too much because we're on a college campus. These numbers may look low. This, though, is a question that's been asked on Time Use Survey, which is how many hours this week were you doing nothing else but taking care of your children? So this doesn't include the whole family driving to lunch, or this doesn't include, for me, if I'm playing basketball with my kids, I'm getting exercise and playing with my children. It's what my wife is doing right now, which is playing cards with an 8-year-old. Okay, that's simply parenting. Or it's the time you spend, just getting your changing diapers or getting your 4-year-old dressed for the day. So the number of hours has gone up almost 50% for women. This is just mothers here. In that same period, women have started working outside of the home much more for pay. Dads have actually doubled the amount of time that they've spent taking care of kids, and I consider that an incredibly good development, but I don't think this is a good development. I think parents are finding that they are on call and in demand, and parenting is much more intensive than it used to be. Some economists think this is good. Isabel Sawhill, excellent economist. My previous book that Matt mentioned, Alienated America, Isabel Sawhill is like one of the heroes in this, but on parenting we disagree. She says, with fewer children to support, parents and society can both invest more in each child, helping them to climb the ladder and become productive citizens in their adult years. That sounds good. Again, economist Melissa Carney characterizes it as smaller families, especially among higher income people, could reflect a quantity-quality trade-off. Again, my children see that slide and they say, so are we the low-quality ones? No, because the intensive parenting, I argue, is not, in fact, high quality. Journal of Pediatrics recently ran a sort of cover editorial about an epidemic of childhood anxiety. Childhood and adolescent anxiety, they're saying, is at record highs, and it's the rich, poor, middle class, everybody in between. White, black, Hispanic, boys and girls. And the editorial said, a primary cause of the rise in mental disorders and it is a decline in opportunities for children and teens to play, roam, and engage in other activities independent of direct oversight and control by adults. In other words, we are making our kids basket cases by supervising them too much, by scheduling them too much. And I think this is a real problem. And I've talked to college administrators who say they encounter that, and kids who say, I have never had control over how I spend my day, and I don't know how to handle it. More often it happens on the subconscious level. This is one of the things that I think overparenting has done, is lead to more childhood and adolescent anxiety. One of the specific things, what I call in the book, the travel team trap. This could be Irish dance or violin too, but it's the taking of a game or something beautiful like music or dance and taking it from something that is good to do for its own sake to this intensive, expensive undertaking that's for the sake of whether it's a D1 scholarship or just achievement or just box checking on a resume. When I was a kid, I got on my bike, I rode down to the Little League field, and when I ended up making the Summer All-Star Teams thing, the parents just met at the Little League field parking lot and drove us to it. Nowadays, I talk to coaches who say, I tell my parents, starting when they're 10, do not put your kids in the local Little League. They're going to just be coached by volunteer dads. Now, that's, of course, me that they're talking about, who they might not know baseball. And you got to put them in the travel sports starting in 10, and they should drop their second sport by age 12, and they should be specializing. All of that is a bad idea, and all of it backfires. There are tons of upsides to the intensive travel sports. For a lot of people, my friend Michael Doherty just wrote a piece arguing that, because he doesn't have any community where he lives because all his neighbors hate him because they know he's a conservative columnist, the only community he can find is on his daughter's Irish dance squad. So that's an argument for it. And yeah, going up against the best pitchers really is tough. And there's a lot of upside to it. If you're a swimmer and you get out there in the pool every day, you're probably developing some virtues that'll pay off later in life. At the same time, one of the many studies I looked at found that the specializers, the kids who by high school were doing one sport 10 months out of the year, that they had a lower sense of self-worth, they had less happiness, more anxiety, and a lower sense of their own skill at the sport in question. So how could it be that the people who play 10 months out of the year feel worse about their excellence in sports than the people who play 3 months out of the year? Well, maybe it's because when you go up and, you make the travel team, and then you make it to the state tournament, and then you make the state all-star team, and you're in a national tournament, at some point you think, I have spent my whole youth to become the best pitcher that I possibly could, and here I'm getting shelled, and I'm like the 20th best pitcher just in the state of Maryland. Failing is good, but failing at something that you've attached your self-worth to, that you've thought subconsciously, Mom and Dad invested all this time and money in me to do this, and now I'm not even that good, that's actually bad for kids. That's high-quality, intensive parenting. Another aspect is helicopter parenting. If you guys have seen the show Stranger Things, it's not all fiction. I think the interdimensional demons part probably is fiction, but like that we could just ride our bikes around when we were in middle school, 5th grade, that really did happen for Gen X. One of the most common terms I heard when I interviewed people about my age was, come home when the streetlights turn on. We don't do that anymore. I'm more free range. I let my kids run around. My wife does, but she's a little more protective. And when she finds out I did something or I let them do something that she didn't know about yet, she gets a little upset. She says, I'm not afraid of kidnappers, Tim. I'm afraid of Child Protective Services. That is, in our old county, Montgomery County, Maryland, these two kids, ages 10 and 6, were taught how to walk to their neighborhood park. And they walked there, and the parents got arrested because, well, it's inherently unsafe for a 10 and 6-year-old to be at a neighborhood park without their own parents. It doesn't matter that there were other adults there, that there were other kids there. They didn't have to cross a major road. It was a safe neighborhood, and nothing happened to them, and nothing even almost happened to them. Well, the thing that happened to them was that their parents got arrested. Another thing from my old neighborhood was when they wanted to put in a sidewalk, some neighbors said, well, a sidewalk would kill my trees, and somebody said, yeah, a car could kill my middle schoolers who have to walk in the street. And this woman told the local newspaper, little kids like this shouldn't be walking to school by themselves anyway. So that mindset. And so one of the facts is people walk a lot less. So this is the title of chapter 3 of my book. Fecundity means, well, fertility, having babies. So chapter 3 is titled, If You Want Fecundity in the Sheets, You Need Walkability in the Streets, which is my belief, and I can't prove it, but I want to test it, that if kids were allowed to run around more, Mom and Dad would have more kids. That when the position we are put in as parents of having to drive our kids everywhere makes life not fun for them and really a drag for us. And so places without good sidewalks, places with too wide lanes, places with too high of a speed limit. I mean, crime is a similar thing. So you hear a lot of urbanists, they talk about walkability, but it's always about getting to your job or getting to the cocktail bar or whatever. If I have to drive to the metro and ride the train into work, I'm fine with that if my kids can walk to the neighbor's house and walk to the local basketball court and walk to the 7-Eleven or walk to their job at Baskin-Robbins. And so that's one of the things that we're not doing as well today, is building places where kids can walk around. And again, I think that it's both related to and it's a cause of our culture. We have more of a car culture. And when they're little, you have to buckle them in and unbuckle them. And of course, you got to take them with you everywhere you go, especially if you don't have a neighbor you could just leave a baby with. And if you guys remember what the baby car seats look like, the toddler car seats, there are 5 points. And one of the points of it is this thing that they sit on when you plop them in the car seat. So you take them somewhere multiple times in this one trip. You're reaching under the kid's butt into this slurry of goldfish and baby butt sweat and spit up to pull it out. It's not fun. It's not fun at all. And then when they after they're potty trained, they always have to go to the bathroom the second you buckle them in. And they always are about to die of thirst the second you buckle them in. Living in a car-dependent world is living in a family-unfriendly world. Here's, though, is a part that's possibly more relevant for the college crowd. I believe our dating culture is totally broken. And we can start with the dating apps. The point of a dating app is to get over what economists call, like, get over some of the friction in a dating world. I think there are probably Shakespeare plays where there's like two lovers who love one another, but neither of them knows it. Star-crossed lovers, two ships passing in the night. And then, more often, there is in real life, the J. Alfred Prufrock worry that, like, this woman I'm interested in has absolutely no interest in me, and I'm terrified of trying to bridge that gap. Both of these things are facts of life that was trying to be erased with the dating apps. They get what I call double secret consent. Before you can even ask a girl out or express an interest in her, you have to get consent to ask her out or express interest in them, which sounds totally backwards to anybody over the age of 40. But that's one of the things that happens. And it doesn't, in the long run, work and result in more coupling, more great matchmaking for a variety of reasons. One of them is it convinces people that, well, the only time that it's okay to do anything like flirt, express interest, that kind of thing, is when you are in an explicit situation where that's what's called for, such as this app. This one guy I quote in my book, Simon, he was playing volleyball, and there was this girl on his volleyball team he really liked. And he wanted to ask her out, but he decided it would be inappropriate to try to use the volleyball team to ask this girl out, as if it was somehow like an abuse of power or an abuse of the volleyball team to do it. He said it would be almost boorish to ask out a girl on my team. Let me be very clear. If you are on a co-ed volleyball team, the point of it is to meet people of the opposite sex. It's not the volleyball, but the dating apps, I think, implant this wrong idea. And I think it also is connected to a bad anthropology. Louise Perry, a feminist writer, says, today's sexual culture prefers to understand people as freewheeling, atomized individuals, all looking out for number one, all up for a good time. That idea of the human being as basically an atomized individual, one of my friends described it, this free-floating, atomized bundle of rights. And you only get asked out after you consent to being asked out. And all these things where we look at the past and we say, women did not have agency, consent didn't matter, and so we make all these reforms and we get things to the point where, okay, maybe we're getting closer to the point where women have more control over their bodies, but then somehow we forget that autonomy and individualism only makes sense in a context, in an anthropology that sees us as fundamentally connected. And so our autonomy to make sure that nobody harms us, touches us, that gets expanded into our autonomy that we ought not be in any sort of relationship with anyone except to the degree that we choose. That doesn't blend well with family. You don't get to decide that you're not responsible for your kid. It doesn't blend well with the idea of lifelong marriage either. It doesn't blend well with a lot of things, but that is this hyper-individualistic mindset that I think has taken over. Stephanie Murray wrote, children are a personal choice and therefore a personal problem, many people seem to believe. She's a mom, a writer for The Atlantic. Have as many as you want, just make sure they don't bother the rest of us. Again, this is not her opinion, this is her describing the cultural idea. It doesn't work. Everybody needs neighbors. Parents need neighbors, need society, need culture more than anybody else. If however many kids you have, just make sure we're not bugged by them. Make sure we can't hear them. Make sure we're not paying for them. That is this, again, hyper-individualistic mindset that is harming our culture. Senator Ron Johnson, when he was opposing a family tax credit, said, well, people decide to have families and become parents. The cost is something they need to consider when they make that choice. I've never really felt it was society's responsibility to take care of other people's children. Well, most of the time, not to take care of other people's children, though sometimes, but all of the time, to help parents raise children has always been society's responsibility. But we forget that. That's the logic of capitalism. I would say this. I would say it's not my job to make sure Tesla's profitable, so I shouldn't be subsidizing green, electric cars. That's my pro-capitalistic view. That logic should not creep in to our vision of the family, but it has. Because another great writer, Christina Emba, writes, by freedom these days, we mean more privacy, more space, less connection, less constraint. That is, we're all less connected because of the various different forces on our culture. I'm going to wrap up with Miley Cyrus. When she said that she didn't want to have kids, she said she was speaking for the millennials as a whole. We're getting handed a piece of crap planet, and I refuse to hand that down to my child. Until I feel like my kid would live on an earth with fish in the water, I'm not bringing another person to deal with that. When I was a kid, this ran in the New York Times as op-ed. No problem facing the earth looms larger than the growth of the reproductive rate of the human species. Virtually all human suffering can be attributed to the effect of a population that's too numerous. So the writer, first of all, that art, the earth is like a head of lettuce, and they're all these bunny rabbits are devouring it because, people like me are breeding like rabbits or something. The author, the point of the article was, we need to teach school children in elementary school that reproduction is bad. And the author was a principal of a public school in Connecticut, the John Pettibone School. I visited there, but the John Pettibone School closed 10 years ago due to low and falling enrollment. When I visited, there was gentle adult yoga going on, and part of the playground had become a dog park. So congratulations, Principal Burley, you got your message across. But that idea, again, overpopulation is killing the planet. We peaked in babies sometime last decade. The whole planet, not just US, the whole planet as a whole is having fewer and fewer babies. We're going to have a shrinking population within our lifetime. So overpopulation, quite literally killing the planet. The starvation that was predicted in the 1960s, nothing like it happened. I think this is connected to a deeper problem. Lack of hope is part of it. But I don't think it's just about climate. Ezra Klein, good writer for the New York Times, said, when people say, oh, well, the earth is going to be on fire, that talk about fear of the future, he says, that's not really going to happen in the United States. Well-off residents of wealthy countries, when they talk that way, it strikes me as a transference of guilt into terror, to feel guilty for what we've done. What we've done is, produce carbon dioxide just by basically being alive in a wealthy country. But I'd go a step further. I'd say that guilt about climate is a totem of a deeper guilt. Again, Miley Cyrus, we don't want to reproduce because we know that the earth can't handle it. Handle what? Handle another baby. It means humans. It means us. She's saying the earth can't handle us. She's talking about us as if we're a cancer on the earth. And I think a lot of people do feel that way. And that is not mostly about other people. It's mostly about ourselves. It's that when you ask the question, are we good? A lot of people say no. I call civilizational sadness. A woman told me, in general, do I think people are good? No, I don't. I think we're the cancer of the earth. The Holy Father noted this. He said, birth rates and a welcoming attitude reveal how much happiness is present in a society. A happy community naturally develops a desire to generate and welcome others, while an unhappy society is reduced to a group of individuals defending what they have at all costs. That zero-sum mentality, that sadness, that unhappiness, that belief in our own badness, I think is a real story here. So, a couple final notes. That's the birth rate in the US. You see the baby boom pretty clearly. It wasn't a makeup for babies that didn't happen in the war. It was an unprecedented, and a lot of people thought impossible, generation-long increase in birth rates, an increase in marriage. How did that happen? I think it's the flip side of the civilizational sadness. Our man in 1945 got off the boats, having just saved the world from a couple evil empires. Our women, waiting on the piers, had just kept the economy going and built all the weapons and the ships and done everything for 4 years. So they smooch on the pier, they go back to the chapel, they get married, and they have a bunch of babies because more than ever before or ever since, we knew we were good. If you ask an American in 1946, are we the good guys? Yes. And I think that explains the boom in marriage and babies. Germany, Japan, and Italy did not have a post-war baby boom. In fact, they led the 20th century baby bust. I remember noting that the three lowest birth rates at one point were those three countries, the people who really couldn't look in the mirror and say we're good. I think that mindset has crept into all of the wealthy world, and particularly in the US. I think that mindset is wrong because I think babies are good. This is, again, the economic argument. That red bar is the number of people who live in extreme poverty. It's gone down, not just as a percentage, but as a raw number in the second half of the last century. The green is the number of people who aren't in extreme poverty, who every day have enough to eat. That's massively gone up. So why has human material well-being increased so much? Who caused that? Was it space aliens? Was it lizard people? Was it climate change? No. Other humans caused that. A lot of humans do a lot of bad, but more humans do good. So I use the economic term there. The expected value of each human is positive. Again, that's, when I give an economic explanation, I believe it, but I don't believe it's more important. I think there's a deeper explanation. So that's actually a slightly old picture of my family there. I chose it because I'm still taller than my sons in that one. But I want to end, before we turn to questions, with a little passage from the end of my book. We had this at that's our old parish and parochial school in Maryland, and we had this teacher, preschool teacher, who basically brought us in there. And she told us, like, the day before the last day of school, she said, I'm not going to be able to be there on the last day. So on the second to last day, I woke up, I was like, Katie, we should get this woman a gift, because she taught 5 of our 6 kids. Like, we owe her the grandest. I write, we first came to St. Andrews in order to put Charlie in her class. The next year, she taught Brendan. A couple years later, at the first day of school, she greeted our Meg. I've been waiting to teach you since you were a baby strapped to Dad's chest. Then she taught Sean, and finally Eve, our 6th and youngest child. We owed Mrs. Anastasia the grandest of all last day of school teacher presents, but we didn't have time to get her anything. And so on the next morning, her last day teaching a Carney kid, I brought her the only thing I could. I brought her my kids. Mrs. Anastasia opened the door at 7:35 to the gift of Eve, Sean, Meg, Brendan, and Charlie, all beaming. She cried and hugged my crew. It's common to mock parents for believing their child is God's gift to the world, but very literally, children are God's gifts to us. My children are gifts to others, not because my children are special, but because my children are children. Humans are good. That truth is obscured at times by our own self-absorption or by others' imperfections, but children, in their own innocence, reflect mankind's innate goodness back to us. In one of Charles Dickens' stories about human wretchedness, the protagonist is a kind and generous child named Nell. The narrator, an old man who wanders London alone, runs into Nell when she is lost and in need of help. This guileless cherub gives him her trust and friendship, and so instantly cheers and inspires the old man. I love these little people, the narrator says, and it's not a slight thing when they, who are so fresh from God, love us. As I felt pleased at first by her confidence, I determined to deserve it. And I still get that feeling. Even after 17 years, and even when again and again I failed to deserve it. It's very easy to not think you're good, to not think you deserve that sort of unconditional love. And we really are fallen creatures. We really do a lot of things that aren't good. But nothing will make you aspire more firmly. Nothing will help you become a better woman or a better man than the love of one of those little ones so fresh from God. Thank you. So we can take some questions, so shoot up a hand if you got a question, an argument, anything like that. Yes?
Mr. Carney, welcome.
Oh, Andrea, thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. I just came back from a summit. So my question for you is, at the spring summit I was just at, we had Dr. Touise come in and give a talk on brokenness insofar as most people view the person in other parties as So insofar as we have this culture that's unfriendly to children themselves, how do we date and marry in a culture where people can't get along because of the other fact that we view the other half as evil?
I think a deep and persistent distrust is at the heart of this problem and so many of our problems. Societal trust is just an immensely valuable thing. I mean, if you could pay for it, you would pay all the riches you had. And if you think about people who do get to pay for a lot of I always think of in one sign of a really nice neighborhood is the kids' tricycles and bicycles on the front yard. That is a trust of their neighbors. And then when you think of a good marriage, just an implicit trust. And online, I run into a lot of these, I guess the manosphere is what I would call it. Guys, even if they're not disciples of Andrew Tate, they absorb some of that junk. And they just say, you can never trust a woman. Like, she's just going to take all your money. I actually recently wrote a piece about how joint checking accounts are not a bad idea. They're actually a good idea. And a lot of the responses I got is like, you are a sucker for trusting your wife. She's going to go ahead and spend all the money on something else. And you can't get by in life unless you do that. But the problem is low social trust reinforces itself. So I'm not giving you a good, easy answer here, except to say that the good news about these vicious circles where people trust each other less, so then they act in a less trustworthy way, is that if you could reverse it just a tiny bit, a little nudge in the direction of more trust really helps out. So I think about my boys. They go to an all-boys school, and one of the things the headmaster says to the parents when they enter is, if you have daughters, imagine the type of man that you would want your daughter to marry. Our job is to help your son become that type of man. That's not an easy task, but that's the way that I think about it. It's just the more that people act in a trustworthy way, the more it spins it in the right direction. That there's no clear action plan to get there, but that's the way you have to think about it. Yes?
At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned early days with certain public figures like Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, and other celebrities, and how they also fit into it. Do you think that today the media no longer supports the idea of growing a family because of the culture has drastically pushed media away from it?
I do think that there was largely, in the last 20 years, a real negative light that it was cast in. There was a pretty funny movie called Idiocracy that I talk about in my book, and my research assistant thought that I should pin the whole book on the fact that Idiocracy came out in the summer of 2006, and it was 2 years later that 18 months later almost that the baby bust started. I think that's an overreach. But the argument of Idiocracy was that the global IQ is going to fall because only stupid people are having babies. Now, the flip side was that the smart people who weren't having babies did not look like heroes in that movie. But that was part of it. There were the depictions of the family, the depictions of the dad in media, even kids shows. In half of them, the dad is this hapless, clueless guy who gets constantly saved from basically tripping over his own feet. And so I do think that media portrayals can be have been pretty negative in the last 20 years, but there's some evidence it's turning around. Wasn't the halftime show a year ago a pregnant musician, or was that an awards ceremony? Every time something like that happens, I think it's positive. Elon Musk is trying to do that by bringing his kid around. He has a family model that I don't endorse, which is not monogamy. Let me put it that way. But I think that so one place I get a little bit of hope is that there is a little bit of turning, and more people are trying to portray the family as positive. My AEI colleague, Brad Wilcox, though, writes about all the negative portrayals of the family, of marriage, of all of that. And I think one of the places it sticks around most, again, is these very online, there's a lot of crazy feminists who hate men and marriage, but the place I actually shoot the most is very online dudes who have decided that marriage is a bum deal. But I do think that the broader culture is starting to swing things back in the other direction. Yes.
So, so a lot of the decline in birth rate you attribute to culture, and culture, which strikes me as right, but also in some ways depressing because culture is really hard to change.
Yes.
It's a lot easier if we can point to some kind of public policy and say like, aha, if we gave people more free daycare,
Yeah.
then that would be enough. Are there any kind of public policy levers that you see as effective in increasing birth rates, and if so,
Yeah.
what are they?
No, it's interesting that this is the third question, because in Washington, D.C., that's like the first, second, and every question. So can public policy help people get the family size that they want, or could it even drive up the desired family size? Yes, but within narrow limits. So Kamala got asked this question, and she gave the right answer. She got asked by, on I think it was Call Her Daddy podcast, got asked, quarter of the women my generation don't ever want kids because they can't afford it. What could you do about it? And she said, we need to make it more affordable to buy and own a home. But I mentioned the financial crisis and the Great Recession. Those of you who don't remember that, that was caused by the government trying to subsidize the buyers of homes. And so Harris suggested we got to juice the production of homes, supply and demand, increase the supply of homes. So whether that means a manufacturing subsidy, I don't know, but certainly there are unnecessary regulations that go beyond anything that protects the worker or the safety or the environment and just drive up the cost of the home. Getting rid of those and making there be more homes, more starter homes would be good. I think I talk about the walkability because that's fundamentally a government responsibility. Sidewalks and streets and in most of America, playgrounds, et cetera, and that every community that's built or every dollar that's spent improving infrastructure should be spent thinking, okay, how can we help people with children? Like actually prioritizing parents. That would be immensely valuable. How can we make it so that kids can get to their jobs, the corner store, the basketball court, their friend's house without needing to be driven by their parents or not getting run over by crossing a 6-lane road? Beyond that, lots of governments have tried. China was very successful in driving down its birth rate, has had basically zero success, and this is a communist country. It's had almost zero success in driving up its birth rate. Hungary was able to stop its decline, maybe only temporarily. What they found was that my interpretation of it all is basically boils down to this. If you give a ton of money to people for having kids, then a small subset of your population will have a lot more kids. And that small subset is people who are already family-minded or religious, usually religious, who are middle class or lower middle class. That set will have more. But you're not going to get from 0 to 1 with big chunks of money. You might get a lot more people going from 2 to 4. And again, these are, very usually religious Catholics in Hungary. France, I think that the child tax credit should be increased, largely on fairness grounds. Subsidized child care actually seems to have no upward effect on birth rates or childhood happiness. What it does is for single moms, it can be a lifesaver. And so that would be the reason to do subsidized childcare. But as far as helping children's mental health or helping people get the family size they want, because subsidizing childcare tends to be subsidizing work, and rather than subsidizing family. So there are policy levers. Part of it is we need to experiment with it. Think for the United States, we've got 50 different sets of state laws, 50 different legislatures. We should do stuff. Hungary's trying stuff. Now, what did the president just say? If you have a 4th child, you don't ever have to pay taxes again. But that only applies to the mom. So again, that's sort of a working mom subsidy. It doesn't, the dad still has to pay taxes, so I don't know how that's going to work out. But there's no one law that's going to pass that would juice the birth rate, especially not in a free country. So, yes.
Well, this is a complicated topic. So many things I could ask about. One thing that you mentioned, that women are They
Mm-hmm.
need the kind of support from the men in their lives in order to have children, right? And again, that's why it gets a bit sensitive, right?
Yep.
Because we don't want to, I can see where, okay, how come women don't want them? Well, because maybe
Yep.
they don't feel like there's men they can rely on, right? And so I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's
In the manosphere, I think that's super important. Just the way that the relationship between the sexes is kind of more fraught than it used to be, maybe.
and maybe he's right. Like I really want to. South Korea is this story exactly, where they have sort of they adopted like half feminism, and this is an argument I treat in here that the half feminism is okay. Women can get any job men can get, but then they didn't adopt and men have to take care of their kids too, and men have to treat women as equals in general, and so just like it's from what I can tell from, again, just the literature and the journalism, it's a totally toxic thing, and some of that might be bubbling up. But a lot of people, the average mother wants to work 20 to 30 hours, especially when her kids are young, and be home when the school bus picks up and drops off. So most women in America do not want to be a stay-at-home mom who owns $0 supported by a breadwinner, but about 25% of them do. And a lot of them don't have that, but largely because they're unmarried. And so there's all sorts of problems. I mean, we were talking earlier about the male-female ratio on a college campus. that throws things off in a lot of ways. There's fewer college-educated men than there are college-educated women in their 20s now. Male wages have gone way down. And some of that is that the men in the 1950s were protected from competition. They basically had a subsidy. They weren't competing with Europe. They weren't competing with immigrants. White men weren't competing on equal level with black or Hispanic men, and they weren't competing with women because of, laws, norms, etc. And so all these things that have pushed towards a salutary equality have also at the same time made a need to rejigger something about dating and marriage and parenthood. I don't think it needs to be totally rewritten. I actually think that what we need to do is make it easier for, I have a piece that'll run in the Washington Post, I think this week, saying working from home is actually a great thing because that's a great way for parents to have a family-friendly job. And that's one way that we have to think about this. I try to avoid, speaking of men, the way a lot of commentators go. And I've said it before. I said, part of the problem is that, men kind of suck these days. I don't actually think that's true, but it is true that in my circles, sort of conservative Catholic circles, there's a lot of guys who whose reaction to feminism is to say, well, A, I'm not going to open a door for a woman because everybody's declared equal. B, I don't think a woman should get any college education because then she'll have student debt and I'll have to pay it off. I had a guy say that to me at a Knights of Columbus like thing. And the older man who was there cut me off before I could answer it. And he said, Will, man up. And B, don't be an idiot to think that a college degree is worthless if your wife does become a stay-at-home mom. Like, that's also one of the things that drives me crazy. Anyway, you got me on a tangent there, but sorry. Yes? Yep.
But it seemed like most of the support for the argument was that seems like it can account for the baby boom after the Second World War. But then you didn't present any evidence that we are increasingly self-loathing
Mm-hmm.
from the time of, I think, 2006 or 7.
Yeah.
So, first of all, what's the evidence that we do hate ourselves more? And also, you made it about us hating ourselves, like feeling bad about ourselves. Whereas when I think about why I wouldn't have wanted to have kids, it's not the usual stuff about the environment, it's going to be so hot, everything's going to be on fire, there's not going to be room, blah, blah, blah. It's actually other people. I think, I wouldn't that I'm a bad person. I think everyone else
See, I, I guess I do a little bit of psychoanalyzing, and I say, people who say hell is other people are expressing self-loathing. So that you love yourself a lot. And so the yes. Well, first on your previous comment, Jesus famously quoted the Old Testament saying that you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. So something for us all to work on. But second, I would say I have evidence that it has the self-loathing has increased, and also the demographics where it's highest is the demographics where the drop-off in the birth rate is most extreme. And not to sort of stereotype, but we're talking about generalities and demographics, it's wealthy white liberals are the ones who have had the biggest increase in self-loathing and hating America, and the biggest decrease in birth rates. And that there's tons of other ways to study this hypothesis. One would be social media use. I would predict that social media use is correlated with, and I think causes, and is caused by, but also causes low self-worth. And I would predict that social media use is correlated with less marriage and fewer kids. It's the last chapter in my book because it's a hypothesis. I certainly don't prove it, but I think the correlations are pretty strong, and you can see the potential mechanism through which it would work. And I think looking historically at different, I think it connects to different countries as well. Because if I'm talking about walkability, there are parts of Europe that are like the most walkable places in the world, and certainly nobody has kids. So that's another just unproven hypothesis. But the thread that runs through these countries is, again, a self-loathing and a lack of sense of worth. Time for one more question, maybe. Yes?
I just wonder what your thought is about the culture not also embracing marriage, because, at least monogamy, let's just say that you want to at least have that relationship be embraced by culture before you even get to kids. And it seems that people are told, you can't get married until you have hit all of these
Yeah.
achievements, and then you're much older, and then you have infertility problems. It's just like this big.
It's absolutely true that we have postponed marriage, especially among the college educated, and that really does account for a huge amount of the baby bust. Some demographers say almost a whole baby bust is about people not getting married or getting married later. And I've started thinking about how to talk about this a lot recently, because people say, oh, well, don't get married too young. I have a colleague that was told whose mom was upset that she was getting married at age 28. And at age 30, her mom is now being like, look, you're not far enough into your career to start having babies yet. I think this is really bad advice. And the don't get married too young, don't have kids too young, there's obviously contexts in which that's true. And if you the simple measure is the age at marriage and the divorce rate. And one of the studies that I looked at said if you start at age 18, the divorce rate is relatively high. It drops until about age 22 or 23. Getting married at age 28 you're no less likely to get divorced than if you get married at age 23. Maybe it's 24. So what happens from that age 18 to age 23? I don't think that the problem is that those people didn't have their career going. It's that some people are just really immature. And you need to understand the idea of sacrifice. I mean, marriage is about laying down your life for another person. It's about giving up. My mother-in-law uses the term surrender. It's just about saying, there's something that I care about, and it's just not going to happen. I tell the story of when we got our wedding registry glasses, the drinking glasses we registered for, and they were coming to my apartment, and I opened it up, and I took it out, and the top of the glass was square. I don't know if you guys remember these Crate and Barrel glasses from 18 years ago. You can't drink out of something that has a square top. There's a reason that everything else is round. I don't care if it looks like, and I just said really loudly in my apartment, I don't want square drinking glasses. My wife hadn't moved in. I was all alone. It echoes back to me. And I could hear how whiny it was. And I just said, this is what marriage is. I'm going to have to deal with these stupid square drinking glasses. Now, good news is they break over time, and we have 0 square drinking glasses left. But that sort of surrender is something that takes a lot of maturity. And so that, I think, is a gap when, why a 20-year-old, you might want to worry about your 20-year-old getting married. But I need to have my career in order, or I need to really know who I am. I don't buy either of those things at all. There's a writer, Thomas Chatterton Williams, who said, don't get married in your 20s because you're not the same person at age 30 as you were at age 20. Of course you're not the same person. You're going to change. You're going to grow. But if you're married at right out of college, then you're changing and growing with another person. I am definitely not the same person I was when I got married in my 20s. My wife was 24 when we got married. She's definitely not the same person. And who we are, I mean, I think of this is really cheesy, but I think of two trees that sort of grow together. Who we are is determined by the other person. And that idea is seen as irresponsible. It's bad because it believes in the sort of the era that we can really plan our life, but it's also a mistake because, again, it buys into that idea that you should be shaping yourself and nobody else should be shaping you. No, it's not what humans are. We were made for living for others, for sacrificing others, for laying down our life for others. Anyway, thank you guys very much.